Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth lecture of the lecture series True Dhamma, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. The last time we were discussing all the scientific basics that are very important when it comes to Buddhism and that we want to use in later chapters. This time around we start with the first content chapter on why meditation might be a good idea and what are all the benefits of meditation. And as always, we start with a short overview what we are doing today. This time around we will do mainly the parts on the left. And I want to remind you, at the bottom you can pretty much see the progress of the entire lecture. The orange bars indicate what is already done, and everything else can be seen as a small progress bar between the second to last and the last blue dot. So you know always where we are in the lecture. Anyway, we do the left part this time around. Might be a bit longer than an hour that we usually do, but some of the other videos were shorter, so I guess I have the time to be still on average an hour long with all the lecture videos. So what will we do today? First of all, we want to understand and discuss the underlying problem, what Buddhist meditation is all about, and what kinds of Buddhist meditation are there. Because there are several different and distinct types of meditation that can be distinguished from each other, and it's probably not what you think about. It's not about vipassana versus samatha, or concentration versus mindfulness meditation. The Buddha never really had such a difference when it comes to everything meditation related. To him, all meditation was pretty much the same. I forgot to set my timer, so I will not overdo it, and set my clock here so that everything is according to plan. But anyway, yeah. Then we will have, for the first time, a bit of story time. In the beginning, I teased that I will be telling the story of the Buddha in the background, and this is the first chapter where the storytelling starts. And this is about the birth of the Buddha, and it is a bit about some mythical aspects that I want to present to you, not because I'm very much into the mythical stuff, but simply to show you how it's usually portrayed in the Pali Canon. The mythical elements are very rare. Newer traditions of Buddhism started adding much more when it comes to the mythical elements. The Buddha was never very much into it. When asked what the biggest miracle was, he said that the miracle of instruction or teaching is the biggest and greatest miracle, and not some, breathing fire or anything like that, or levitating. Then we will try to understand why sensuality overall is an approach that, while most people follow it, is doomed to fail. Sensuality describes, in that regard, every gratification that comes in through the 5 physical senses that we call our own. So nice images, nice smells, nice sounds, nice tastes, and nice touches, and pretty much thoughts about sensuality also count. And then we try to understand why it fails, why we cannot attain lasting happiness through the senses. Then we go through the typical problems of why few people meditate. And lastly, for today, I think that's a good point to stop at that time, we try to understand common myth and dismantle common myths about meditation. But anyway, enough for the overview for today. Let us now come to the content. And as always, I like to start with 5 minutes of mindfulness on non-reactivity. And I would invite you to pause the video here for optimal benefit and do 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation. So in essence, whenever there comes up an urge to, for example, scratch yourself in meditation, just sit there, relax, maybe relax into it, and do not react upon that itch. Try not to interact it, treat it with indifference. Do that for 5 minutes and then continue the video. I will not do it with you. You can just pause. I don't want to needlessly prolong the video. So I give you a moment. Okay, let's assume you are done now, so we can continue with the video. And now to the first part, to the actual problem. And as always, I like to start, not as always, but as often, I like to start with a small comic strip. I hope I can show this here. I'm of course attributing the owner of the comics, and this one is displaying a very good reason for noble search. Noble search means that we try to find the way out of suffering, and this person here has a lot of problems, as we can see in the panel there. The person is stressed, is tired, unmotivated, and hydration is also essential. And then they drink some water and still have 99 problems out of 100. So that did not solve the problem at all. But what the Buddha prescribes does solve the problem once and for all, for good. And it's very hard to understand that on a level where it matters. But anyway, let us now come to what most lectures or resources on Buddhism start with, namely the Four Noble Truths. And the importance of the Four Noble Truths cannot be overstated. Those are the very core of Buddhism, what sets Buddhism apart from other religions, and an insight into the Four Noble Truths means that you have escaped 99% of all your suffering, and you can never suffer from those things again. As an example, a person who has understood the Four Noble Truths cannot really suffer from overthinking anymore. It is just impossible. They have seen through the patterns of their thoughts, and they know how they work, and as a result, they cannot suffer. It's impossible. But anyway, let us now go through them one by one and try to understand what it actually means. We will go through them in much more detail in a later chapter, namely in chapter 6, I believe, and chapter 7 or 8 maybe, and then we will really understand them. If you actually are a truth seeker and want to escape suffering for good, then this is what you must understand. And the Four Noble Truths, just as a teaser, contain the Discourses on Dependent Origination, which is the teaching that the Buddha called special to the Buddhas. Everything else is not special to the Buddhas, but that is. And the first noble truth is that suffering exists. It is an inseparable part of existence as a self, as a human being. As long as we consider ourselves a self, as long as we live the way we lived before, we suffer. And suffering is not always the battlefield type of suffering that people are experiencing. When the Buddha described suffering, he said things like old age is suffering, death is suffering, illness is suffering, not getting what one wants is suffering, getting what one not wants is also suffering. So there are many different kinds of suffering. And even the very subtle urge to get up from your chair to get something to eat, or to eat sweets to cover up some of the bad feelings due to being rejected today, all of that is suffering. And all of that can be removed from your life. And even pain, at least the suffering part of pain, can be removed by insight into the Four Noble Truths. And this is something that is very powerful and sounds almost magical or mythical. People have no idea, or it sounds so foreign and so distant that they do not give it any second thought. But it is absolutely possible to be completely free from suffering in this very life. And this is something that most other religions that I know do not offer, at least not in such a structured way, where you can just work off a list of things and get the final result. But anyway, the second noble truth is that suffering depends on causes. And the cause for suffering is craving. When there is craving, when we want things to be different, then we suffer. When we don't want things to be different and are perfectly at ease with how things are, then we would not suffer. Then there would be no craving. And when what suffering depends upon ceases, namely craving, then suffering also vanishes. And this is not to be understood in a temporal sense. Those things are all there at the same time. When there is suffering, there must also be craving. It is not possible that we suffer when there is no craving present. So when we remove the cause of suffering, then suffering cannot exist any longer. And it is the only way to remove suffering, by the way. And this might sound a bit grim, as Buddhism is a lot about suffering. But that does not mean that there are no good times or no good feelings. Obviously, there are good times and good feelings, but they will stop at some point. And this might be very jaded sounding, but every loved person will die at some point. And the Buddha said it's better to be prepared for that, via meditation, for example, so that you do not blindly stumble into catastrophes. That will inevitably happen, because no one is immortal. We like to ignore the fact of our own mortality, but still, we are very much affected by it. And the last noble truth, which is the noble truth of the path or the training that leads to the elimination of craving, that exists, and the Buddha laid it out, namely as a noble eightfold path. And again, we will deal with that training that leads to the actual freedom from craving, to the actual freedom from suffering in chapter 6. And we'll be a bit deeper down the road, but still. And in summary, while not everyone might be interested in the complete freedom from suffering, as it feels too distant, feels too unattainable or anything like that, while it is very much attainable, then there is still meditation that can be performed for self-improvement purposes. While you might not meditate to be free forever, you can still meditate to be better at whatever you do. So everything that I present in this lecture is good for both causes, pretty much. Good for, well, freedom or liberation from suffering, and good for self-improvement. So it is well worth listening in any case. Anyway, let us continue. The first thing that is very important is to get an intuitive understanding what suffering even is. And I like to do those things with a small experiment. Again, the upper part is what you should do, and before you read the lower part, you should actually try to do the experiment. And this one is rather easy. As you are sitting there right now, ask yourself if you would want anything different right now. Do you want your general circumstances to be otherwise? Is there something missing? Maybe you want a house. Is there an urge to move or scratch yourself, change the posture, thirst, some desire for tasty food, some desire to have a girlfriend, some desire not to suffer from a certain illness or disease or anything like that? And again, you can pause the video for a moment and think about it. Yeah. I assume that you are done now. And suffering is a translation from the Pali word dukkha. And dukkha is the opposite of sukha. Sukha means peacefulness, and dukkha means unease. And you don't have to experience suffering or starvation or a battlefield. All of this that you just experienced just upon thinking about certain things is dukkha. It is the urge to change your circumstances for the better. This is suffering. Suffering is so ever present that we do not even notice it. It's like being born underwater as a tadpole and never knowing anything but water, or as a human never knowing anything but air. If there was or gravity, it's like going into space and suddenly there's no gravity anymore. This is a paradigm shift when there is no more suffering. It's very extreme and it's very earth-shattering once you understand the Four Noble Truths. But anyway, enough of the teasers. Let us continue with the content. And I also like to explain the Four Noble Truths in yet another way that makes it a bit easier to understand them. Because the Four Noble Truths and non-temporal logic sound very daunting in the beginning. This, however, this onion diagram that I like to use when it comes to suffering is a bit easier to understand. And I like to interpret it in two different ways. One, the way in which we discover it, and one, the way in which the Buddha explains it. And this one is rather easy to understand. The outer layers of the onion diagram can be directly experienced. Discontentment or depression is something that very much affects us. All the other things are either primary or root causes of our suffering and our problems. And in this case, our depression or discontentment relies on our clinging and our addictions, which in turn relies on repeated conditioning, which relies on craving or strong desires, which in turn rely on coping by sensuality, by engaging in acts of eating chocolate or watching Netflix or pornography to distract ourselves from our negative emotions or feelings. And those negative feelings and emotions are yet again a cause for that. And then the cause for that is wrong attention and wrong striving, which in turn depend on wrong ideas. From this order, it is very difficult to understand the relationship between those factors, but that is not the order in which the Buddha explained it. The Buddha discovered this relationship, which is very important to keep in mind. While it might not seem very related in that order, once discovered, you can explain it very well to other people. Namely, because you have wrong ideas of how the world works, you direct your attention at the wrong things and strive towards the wrong things. For example, if you set your mind on having a house because you think that makes yourself happy and work towards it very hard, and then you buy a house and realize, oh, that was not so great after all, then you have a problem. Suddenly you are suffering. So you had a wrong idea. That was not the way out of suffering. That was not the way to attain true happiness. And as a result, there will be negative emotions because you are suddenly confronted with what you do not want. And that is suffering, as the Buddha explained. And as a result, most people leap out to sensual gratification, leap out to things that make them feel better, things that hide their suffering. We eat chocolate, for example, when we have bad emotions, because it hides the bad emotions. It hides the bad feeling and replaces them, at least temporarily, with something better feeling. And as a result, we create craving for more in the process. We create a strong desire for chocolate because we learned on a very subconscious level that eating chocolate just works. Suddenly we don't feel bad anymore, at least for the moment, and disregard the future effects of that chocolate eating. And thus we do it over and over again. We repeatedly condition our mind to like eating chocolate and to associate it with freedom from suffering and freedom from bad emotions. And as a result, we eat more and more, cling to the eating of chocolate or whatever cope comes to mind. Everyone has a cope, everyone has addictions, and we develop strong addictions. And as a result, at some point, those addictions cannot be satisfied anymore. It is impossible. You can easily see that with drug addicts. They cannot get more of their substance of choice. Yet there is an effect that is called the hedonic treadmill, namely that we adapt to the strengths of gratifications. We need more and more and more, and at some point we are just discontent and depressed. And at that point, all the debt that we accumulated, the debt of sensuality, as the Buddha called it, unloads on us at one time, and we feel supremely bad, and we have to pay back the entire gratification that we borrowed with interest in the future. And from that direction, it's rather easy to understand the diagram. From the other way, it's rather hard to understand it. That's why most people never actually see the danger in addictive material until it is too late, until they actually experience the negative byproducts of it. But anyway, let us continue. So what did the Buddha promise? He did promise freedom from all suffering right here and now, and not after death. And he promised that by the means of awakening, by the means of understanding our condition better. And by understanding, by direct understanding, not just intellectual understanding, we must directly see things in our experience, we are suddenly free. And this is nothing mythical, by the way. Many people try to make a mythical experience out of liberation, but that is not what the Buddha taught. The ultimate knowledge that sets us free from all suffering is quite, it can even be anticlimactic for most people, at least when you try to describe it to people who have not had that. It completely changes everything on the inside, but from the outside nothing looks different. You're just a bit more happy and a bit more calm and composed. But on the inside you're completely free from suffering. On the outside it looks identical. You do not emit rainbow auras or anything like that. But once you understood it, not suffering is a default state. And it's not too different from learning how to add numbers. Understanding meditation or understanding spirituality follows the same processes of understanding everything else. It is not something that for some reason works completely different from everything else. It is the same mind that learns. And understanding the Four Noble Truths means you know how to stop any suffering, how to escape suffering that has arisen in your experience. And once you understood that, it cannot arise again. It's not that you must suffer, but that you must manage the suffering better. It's that it does not arise anymore. So you do not need to hide from it anymore. You do not need to cope anymore, because it's simply not there anymore, simply because you robbed it of the supporting condition. The problem is that not every mind can just understand the Four Noble Truths. Most minds are reactive and very much conditioned to want chocolate and not meditation. So we always want our copes, and we have to experience a great degree of trauma, and a very good example that our coping mechanisms do not work in many cases, like when a loved one dies, and then we can actually try to understand meditation properly. And as an example, an unconcentrated mind can also not understand mathematics, as you can see. So it's good in many cases. So the Buddha first explains that we should train ourselves in virtue, which just means emotional non-reactivity. When there is a feeling, we do not follow that feeling by trying to hide it with chocolate, or by trying to ignore it, or by distracting ourselves from it, or anything like that. We just let it be in the mind. And once we are good enough at that, then the entire universe of the Buddha's teachings suddenly becomes available to us. But the work must always happen before the insights come. It's not a mythical experience that is handed to you. It is a result of your own effort, at trying to understand the Buddha's teaching, of your own efforts at reducing your own craving, and all of that. So it is very much something that you do, which is very important to understand. The Buddha always called it a training, a gradual training, a practice, something that you do, what you attain through manly effort and striving. So those were his words. And this is the Buddha's promise. Anything short of an impossibility to suffer ever again is unacceptable when it comes to the Buddhist kind of meditation. When it comes to self-improvement, yeah, it's also good when you are better at your job and are better at investing because you are not as emotionally reactive anymore. But still, it's even better not to be unhappy ever again. So I can only recommend the Buddhist kind of meditation to you. So yeah, the Buddha also liked to explain what he taught through the means of similes. And this is very good because it gives you a very good intuitive understanding. And one of the best similes that I like when it comes to understanding the Dhamma, namely his teaching, is the simile of the 100 spears. And the Buddha explained it as follows. Monks, suppose there was a man who had a lifespan of 100 years. Someone would say to him, look, here is an offer, fellow. They will stab you at dawn with 100 spears, at noon with 100 spears, and in the evening with 100 spears. And you, thus stabbed day after day with 300 spears, at the end of the 100 years, you will realize and understand the Buddha's teachings of the Four Noble Truths that you have never realized and understood before. And now what the Buddha says it is fitting, monk, for a clansman intent on his own good to accept that offer. To really do that, to go through all that torture. For what reason? Because this condition, the human condition, is without discoverable beginning. It has no first point where things went wrong. It has always been like that. And there can be no beginning discerned for blows by spears, blows by swords, blows by axes. And the breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths, the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, is accompanied only by happiness and joy. Happiness and joy and relief so great that it makes up for all the torture that you have gone through before. And again, I will move aside so you can actually scan the QR code if you wish to actually read up that sutta for yourself. Because it's a very good sutta. All the suttas that the Buddha gave are very good, and this might be a thing that is not so commonly known, but all the suttas are pretty much the same. People always talk about this one sutta is the best, or this is the deepest sutta, or something like that. And that is not true. All the suttas are the same thing, pretty much. They all have the same core. It's just that the Buddha formulated them for different target audiences. They all teach the very same thing, or a prior step to attain something later. Some people were not prepared for the actual Dhamma teachings, so he had to teach them what they were ready for. Anyway, let us continue. And this is also a very good simile that I wanted to present. And this is a promise that it really works. And it has two parts because it's a bit longer. And it's a rather famous simile of the hen and the eggs. And what the Buddha essentially describes in the simile is that you don't really have to believe in all the teachings of the Buddha. They still work. And what he says is, monks, when a monk is not intent on development of his mind, even though he forms the wish, may my mind be liberated from the taints by non-clinging. May I be free from suffering, essentially. Yet his mind is not liberated from the taints. Well, for what reason? Because he lacks development. He has not trained himself. And now the simile begins. Suppose there was a hen with 8, 10, or 12 eggs that she had not properly covered, incubated and nurtured. Even though she might form the wish, may my chicks pierce their shells with the point of their claws or their beaks and hatch safely. Yet the chicks are incapable of doing so. For what reason? Because the hen had not properly covered, incubated and nurtured her eggs. That hen simply had not done the right things. Even though she wished for good results for it to happen, it did not happen, simply because she did the wrong things. And now in contrast, suppose there was a hen with 8, 10 or 12 eggs that she had properly covered, incubated and nurtured. Even though she might not form the wish, may my chicks pierce their shells with the points of their claws or beaks and hatch safely, yet the chicks are capable of doing so. For what reason? Because the hen had properly covered, incubated and nurtured her eggs. And this is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Seventh, Sutta number 1771. And this is very important, because what the Buddha essentially says here is that you don't have to believe in all of this. As long as you do the right things, you will get the appropriate rewards. So as long as you meditate rightly, as long as you understand rightly, you will get the result of the right view and have that supreme relief that the Buddha described in the prior simile. So it's always a good thing. You don't have to believe it, you will get the results nonetheless, which is also very important. Anyway, let us continue. Now it's time for a short story overview, and I like to start in chronological order based on the book The Life of the Buddha. And we will now begin. So this is from the Digha Nikaya number 14, I believe. And the birth story of the Buddha is rather mythical in experience. This is not too bad. I know many people have a very hard time with the mythical elements, but in essence, they make no difference towards the teaching. So if you ignore if you throw away the entire teaching of the Buddha just based on that, based on aspects that have nothing to do with the teachings, then well, I guess then you were not ready for freedom from suffering, and let's put it like that. So that freedom from biases is a necessary precondition to actually try to understand Buddhism. What you do not understand, you can just set aside and try to understand later, but try not to throw away the entire teaching is based on an emotion. So essentially what the Buddha did is he was waiting in the Tava-Timsa heaven, which is the heaven of the contented, for his birth, for the right conditions, for the birth of a Buddha. And then when he found out, the conditions were rather good on Earth, there were suitable parents, there was a suitable culture around where he could actually practice and propagate the Dhamma, then he descended into a queen's womb when the conditions were right, which was supposedly accompanied by a great light and an earthquake. And then the mother was guarded by devas, which is pretty much the Indian word for angels. So those are deities, pretty much. And their mother was exceptionally pure. But she died after giving birth to the Buddha after 10 months of pregnancy. And this birth was supposedly very clean, and it happened while traveling, while standing. But the baby was caught by the guarding devas. Which is, of course, a nice story. The entire mythical elements are very good advertisement. They are not essential for the teachings, but nonetheless, many people think in that terms. And it's supposedly, or probably, it was probably good to have such stories, as provably the teachings are still around today. And then the child Buddha supposedly said that I am the highest in the world, I am the best in the world, I am the foremost in the world, and this is my last birth. Now there is no more renewal of being. So what you make of that story is not so important, but this was supposedly how the Buddha was born. And after that, we have a small gap. There's not much known about the early days and the childhood of the Buddha. There are only very abstract and general descriptions of all of this, just like there was very little known about the early days of Jesus Christ, for example. For some reason, people are not really interested in that. Yeah. But in summary, the mythical elements are very rare in the canon, and this is one of those rare examples. And they make no real difference to the actual training, to the actual teachings. So if you have a strong bias against such teachings, well, then maybe just ignore them and focus on the meditative training instead. But disregarding the entire Dhamma based on just a feeling that you don't like it, that would be foolish. Anyway, let us now continue with the sensuality part of this presentation, which highlights the core problem of the human condition and why, at some point, all our mundane efforts at attaining happiness will fail inevitably. And in essence, sensuality means gratification through the senses to cover up or hide our suffering. Any bad feeling must be hidden behind chocolate or anything like that, at least for a person who is very much not developed in mind and has very strong, craving, let's put it like that. They must immediately react out of their feelings. Yeah. So obvious examples for sensuality or gratification through the senses is pretty much everything that we call nowadays instant gratification. So instant gratification is pretty much what the Buddha called sensuality, or you could use that comparison to better understand what the Buddha meant by all of his teachings. And good examples are chocolate and drugs, pornography, video games, and also compulsive sexuality as an example. Those things feel good in the short term, and there's no denying that, obviously, but the long-term effects are not very much in your favor. And for many people, at least younger people, who the Buddha called intoxicated with youth, intoxicated with life, intoxicated with health, pretty much. For them, it is very hard to understand because sensuality at that time is easy to get, and it seems inviting, immediately gratifying, and all those things. And it's very much going against the stream if you don't follow your immediate urges. And subtle examples are company, distractions, and views. So, for example, political views are also a form of gratification or distraction, at least, because you hide yourself from your suffering by sometimes even creating negative emotions. If you are watching politics or reading politics online and are just getting rageful and all agitated by it, then many people do that because it does not feel as bad as their condition would otherwise feel. And the Buddha compared it with a person suffering from leprosis burning their wounds, which gives them some twisted sense of relief. But in the end, that burning is very painful still. And when the underlying condition would be healed, they would not need that burning anymore. And they would not perceive it as pleasant anymore. But since they are suffering in their lives even more than when they look at online politics, they continue doing that as an example. And yeah, sensuality is the only known way to cope with discomfort and bad feelings for most people. And everything that feels good is good, and everything that feels bad is bad in the common perception of things, which is not true when we go by the long-term effects, and it really takes some time for that message to sink in. Yeah, and engagement in sensuality always makes craving stronger and discomfort in the future too, as we will see in later chapters. When we feel down, we hide from our feelings. This is pretty much the gist of all of it. And again, we can make a small experiment to understand the fleeting nature of our desires, so we understand why it might not be fully worth it to engage in all those things. Again, please only read and do the upper part, and the explanation should be left out. So yeah, let's begin with the experiment. Try think back 1, 5, 10 or 20 years. At each stage of your life, if you are that old already, you had a most urgent desire or wish that you wanted to be fulfilled. Really try to think hard what it was. Most of them are likely completely meaningless by now. There is no reason to assume that this trend will change at any time in the future. Maybe it was a toy truck, the biggest sandcastle, being respected by your childhood friends, an expensive car, fame and reputation. Think about it for a moment. Yeah, as soon as you have any of that, the next thing comes along your way, and immediately, and any immediate desire is immediately replaced by the next one. And the process never stops. It's very important to keep that in mind. Most of the time, you cannot even remember the most urgent desire of the past. I can ask you for the last 3 days and you might be able to tell me, but a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, well, that will be very difficult. So there's no reason to assume that your current desires are any different from that. And understanding that really helps you, see your desires in a bit of a different light, because the process never stops. Anyway, let us now have a look at this small comic that I also like. This comic drawer, Buttersafe, also compares sensuality in a sense, a special kind of sensuality, with a trap. And he says, why would any fly ever land on something that looks like that, namely the fly trap? Why would any mouse ever be so stupid to fall for such an obvious trap? Come on, bears, how can you possibly let yourself stuck on that? And then we have the person that might be playing video games, scrolling through social media all day, watching pornography, binge-watching Netflix. How could you ever do that? Well, that is the characteristic of a trap. It is effortless. If it was not effortless, no one would fall for it. That's why the Buddha compared sensuality with a trap most of the time, because it is effortless. You go there and then you are caught after a while. The chains of habit are too thin to be seen when they are still young and weak, but they are too thick to be broken when you are a bit older and the habit is already ingrained. But yeah, let us now have a look at the iceberg of all of it. And I really like those iceberg metaphors when it comes to instant gratification as an example. And the stuff above the surface is immediately visible when it comes to sensuality and gratification through the senses, or as we could call it, through instant gratification. All of sensuality is pretty much instant gratification. You want something right now to cover up your bad feeling. And immediately, it is cheap, it is nice, normal, there's a lot of advertising, everyone does it, it's pleasant, inviting, all those nice qualities. And if you don't know any better, because no one has told you, it really seems like a good choice. But then after a while, after you engage in it for a few weeks, for months, years, even decades sometimes, when you chose a rather mild kind of instant gratification, then you will suddenly realize that there's a lot of restlessness involved, that you get desensitized, bored. There are bad emotions nonetheless. You adapt to the pleasure. There's wanting, there's muddle-mindedness, restlessness, aggressiveness. And after a while, the more or the deeper you get into it, you also start rationalizing. I have to play video games all day. I must get angry when the router fails or my neighbors block the internet or something like that. You get unconcentrated. After a while, especially around younger generations, it's not uncommon to only have an attention span of 7 seconds or something like that, simply because they watch TikTok all day. And then you get agitated. And deep down the iceberg, there are all the severe problematic results that people cannot really associate with all the instant gratification they engaged in, because the process is so slow and our mind is very bad at detecting such small changes on a day-to-day basis. The Buddha compared it with the handle of a tool that gets used up every day a bit, but you can't say how much of it got used up every day. It's a gradual, very slow process. But yeah, after a while, you experience a lot of anxiety, rage, apathy, isolation, more stress, unhappiness, depression. Many people are even desperate at some point because they know no way out of it. Because the cope that they had, that worked for them for a long time, suddenly stopped working. And they can't do anymore. You can only play video games for 16 to 18 hours a day, and then you have to stop. You have to sleep. And when you sleep, all the problems start surfacing again because the cope is no longer there. So yeah. But yeah, let us continue. And this here is a true problem of sensuality, what I try to explain in the next slides. And this is pretty much the concept of the hedonic treadmill as it is known nowadays. In the past, it had different names, but in essence, what it describes is that humans adapt to any kind of pleasure. If they would not adapt to any kind of pleasure, then we would die out. We would repeat the same behavior over and over again. We could just, look at the same series over and over again and get the same amount of gratification through it. There would be no need to stop doing that behavior. So there must be a mechanism of the mind that disincentivizes such behavior. And so we numb down our reward circuitry in the mind, gets adapt to the sensual pleasures, and it gets harder to attain the same amount of pleasure next time. So yeah, what we can see here is pretty much the gratification we get through eating sweets. It gets higher while we eat the sweets, and then it falls down. The immediate desire is satisfied, and then again, drugs is a prospect of drugs. Dopamine goes up, and yeah, after we have the drug, it falls down, this time even deeper than before. Then we watch series, and in the night, we have to stop. We have to go to sleep, and then our overall gratification levels go way down. They adapt to the chronically high or elevated level of reward hormones, and this is a problem. But yeah, the entire process can also work the other way around. The adaptation work in both ways. It has to. Otherwise, humans also had a problem, at least from an evolutionary perspective. In the beginning, we lived, which is unpleasant at first. Exercising is always unpleasant. No one would do it if there were no future rewards associated with it. But after a while, after it stops, as the Buddha put it, bad emotions are nice when they stop, and good emotions are painful when they stop. Then we have good feelings. Then we work and can buy us nice things in the future. Again, it's not too pleasant for most people. And after a while, when we stop, the gratification goes up again. Then we meditate, which is also not very pleasant. It's essentially an exercise in enduring itches and sitting and whatnot, especially in the beginning. And yeah, after a while, the gratification goes up. And suddenly we can sleep at night because our gratification levels are naturally higher, which is also interesting. That does not solve the problem at all because bad things can still happen to us, but at least the everyday suffering, the anxieties, the depression, that can be removed like that. Because that type of gratification is not related to sensuality in that sense. It is not related to instant gratification. So it is more durable. It might not be super durable. You are still affected by old age, illness, and death, but it's preferable to the first kind. And now to a more realistic example. A mixed kind of gratification. And in the modern world, a person who is lifting weights is already kind of ahead of the pack, or who is exercising in any meaningful way. They exercise and then the gratification level go up a bit naturally. Then they might take drugs, which is not so nice. The gratification level goes down. Series, again, go up and go down. But overall, you might still be above average for a bit. So even introducing some good habits can help, at least as it helps you in comparison with other people. And that is already a good deal for many people, simply because they feel better in comparison to others, and that can boost their self-esteem a bit, and then they suffer less, at least for a time. So yeah, that's a more realistic example. But now to a real comparison between the underlying problem, the underlying misconception. And I really want to illustrate the entire point with this figure that I've created. The problem is that people mistake pleasure and happiness. And advertisement really added a big chunk of problematic interpretations to the entire thing. So people mix up those two. You do not get happiness from eating chocolate, but you get some pleasure out of it. Happiness is a state of contentment, that you don't need anything. That's a state of peacefulness, of ease. And pleasure is actually a state of a very active, agitated state. You want something. You are burning, in a sense. Your senses are burning with a desire for chocolate, if you're addicted to chocolate, as an example. So it's very, very different in nature. When you are happy, you don't need anything. You could just sit on a chair and meditate, as an example, or sit in the middle of the nature and just enjoy your time there. But most people nowadays can't do that. They can't do that at all, because their mind has completely mixed up those two things, the happiness and the pleasure. And I like to compare happiness with a tank full of water. You have a natural degree of happiness, and then the tank is full. You have a natural inflow that automatically fills itself pretty much. And then we have our nasty tendency to be greedy towards pleasures. We want pleasures right now. We want to change our situation right now, which is aversion. We want to ignore things by distracting ourselves. And then we poke holes into the tank in hope that we get more out of it. And as a result, well, the tank loses more and more of its capacity, and our natural happiness fades, and we only have some remaining happiness left, which is problematic for most people, because it gets less and less, and they feel the need to cope more and more, and then they poke more and more holes into the tank to get a quick fix of, well, perceived happiness. And in the process, they are kind of self-sabotaging, and most people are completely unaware of this process, which is rather sad. The solution to this would be to stop poking holes into the tank so it does not lose its natural happiness for a short burst, but long-time problems. And we always want more now and damage the tank to get it. We fail to see that we trade a short burst of pleasure for long-term misery. And it would be really good to understand what I try to explain here, because this is a core problem, especially of very depressed people. They are in a situation where they feel an uncontrollable need for poking holes in the tank. They need their cope because they perceive themselves to be in such a bad state that they have no other choice. Well, no choice. They have to find out what they are doing wrong in that regard. And for many people, it is very much related to that. They self-sabotage. They let their own happiness run out of the tank. So this is a very good simile or metaphor that I like to use to explain the problem. And yeah, in essence, sensuality or instant gratification is the umbrella term for all addictions. Sensuality is the mother of all addictions. And any addiction is the helpless dependency and uncontrollable wanting of substances or experiences. Well, sexuality is not exactly a substance, but you can still experience a lot of wanting, uncontrollable wanting for it. And all addictions can be generalized. And all addictions enter through the 5 physical senses. It is always something, either an image, either a sound, a taste, a touch, a smell. All those things are what we desire. It's no coincidence. That is why the Buddha called it sensuality, because it comes in through the senses. We want gratification through the senses. And all addictions are about pleasant sense contacts. We only want the good stuff and want to avoid everything that is bad. And sensuality is thus the addiction to pleasant sense contacts. And it is the most general addiction of them all. You cannot generalize it any further because there is nothing beyond the senses, really, as we understood, hopefully, in lecture number 0, where we understood all the scientific basics and the Plato cave simile and everything. And overcoming sensuality means overcoming all addictions at once, so you can never be addicted again. Then you don't need anything to be happy all the time. This is the goal that we want to reach in Buddhism. And sensuality is always all or nothing. As soon as we perceive something as pleasant or as agreeable or as addiction worthy, everything else is worse in comparison. So by going for something like heroin, the normal state is bad. So there is always a null sum, or even worse, not in your favor, as the craving also makes everything else even less gratifying. And the Buddha said essentially that all feelings are bad. Well, this is a tough pill to swallow because good feelings obviously feel good. But yeah, good feelings are good while they last, but they are very bad when they stop. And bad feelings are feeling bad while they are there, but they feel very good when they stop. And neutral feelings feel bad most of the time when they are not known, because people crave having feelings at all, and they are quite pleasant when they are known. But they are so subtle that a mind that is untrained cannot see them. And overcoming sensuality requires going against the stream of the world, because sensuality is, by design, akin to a trap. It is effortless to give in. So going against sensuality requires a lot of effort. And our biological programming is to crave sensuality. It was a very good idea. in an evolutionary context where food items were scarce. So we are constantly motivated to find some and to survive. But thus, as we go against that programming, the renunciation of sensuality, the giving up of sensuality, the not going for it feels kind of uncomfortable, at least initially, before the pleasure of renunciation sets in, which is also very much there. And those people who diligently pursue non-sensuality will experience great pleasure that is far superior to anything that is related to sensuality. And at some point, you realize that craving, and overall the entire process of craving, is pain, and renunciation removes that pain. And this requires many great character traits that everyone can cultivate. And we will analyze those in chapter 3. And few people, sadly, are up for the task, and it usually requires a traumatic event. Otherwise, we do not go for it. As long as we think that sensuality is working, we have no reason to stop engaging in sensuality. And it's only natural. I mean, as long as it's working, why would we ever stop? It would not make any sense. But and now to the reason why so few people are meditating, which was also already a bit implied in the last slide. Simply because it's hard, and we see no reason for it to do it. And in the beginning, we even have a hard time to start and meditate. And again, and this will be the last iceberg, I promise. But again, this iceberg illustrates it quite well. Because meditation does not even seem like a good solution in the beginning, even when you are suffering greatly, even when you have all your other copes failing. Still, meditation does not appeal very, very nice or very goal-oriented many times, simply because it is very time-consuming. Oftentimes it's associated with esoteric people. It's very boring and feels bad immediately. It's hard, difficult, a religion, which is, especially in the West, it's not very well received, and it's very, woo-woo. But after a while, if you should find anyone who convinces you of the merit of meditation, you will start getting all kinds of benefits out of it. It's not so bad after all. It's quite peaceful while you do it. You have better sleep, it's relaxing, your mind is quite clear, you have a very good attention span, you are calm, in a good mood, low stress, and most importantly, if you also cultivate virtue, there's a lot of non-remorse, simply because you do not behave in a way that creates a remorse. And a lot of our human interactions create remorse simply because we do not know any better. We argue with other people and feel bad afterwards. And by not reacting out of bad feelings, we don't argue with people anymore, and thus we are not as remorseful. And then if we do it for a very long time, there is a lot of contentment and rapture. We experience few problems. There's a lot of mindfulness, a sharp mind, a blissful state, samadhi, as the Buddha called it, collectedness of mind. Even your IQ gets higher. You have a new taste and vigor for life. There might even be jhana, happiness, ultimately equanimity and complete liberation of mind, so that you can never suffer again. Oh, that is down the iceberg, that is the problem. And most people can only see the stuff above the surface, because that is the only thing that is visible, when you do not really dive into it in depth. And that is a problem with most things that are related to work. This is why it is so unpopular nowadays. People don't want to work because all the good stuff is delayed. People want results right now. Everyone wants to be rich right now. Everyone wants to feel the nice feelings right now. They do not yet understand, in many cases, that the behavior that they are engaging in causes lots of long-term problems. And thus, they fall for it. They fall for the trap, as the Buddha put it, and cause all kinds of misery for their future selves. So this is among the reasons why so many people engage in behaviors that are very harmful for them. And let us now come to the last part for today's presentation, namely the common myth in meditation. And this might take a bit longer, maybe 15 minutes or so, to go through, because there are many false myths about meditation, at least when it comes to Buddhist meditation. And this is what we focus on. Even when we focus on the kind of self-improvement Buddhist meditation, it is still Buddhist meditation and very different from what people think about it. But anyway, let us begin with some bad biases about meditation, as meditation is often regarded as useless. And many people think that nothing good can come from doing nothing. And they completely misconceive what meditation is, because it is not doing nothing. Doing nothing is also a doing. While ultimately the result of meditation might be related to that, it is not a very good idea to start thinking about it like that. And Well, the meditator's mind is actually very active while he sits on a cushion. It's just that he is physically very immobile. So that is not a very good bias that should not keep you from meditation. And then again, many people that I know say that meditation is not for them, despite never trying. They actually have no idea what they are designating by meditation when they say it is not for them. And they still reject the idea. And this is something that I guess it is natural. It is very human to do that, but it's very much non-beneficial. So you should actually question your motivation. Why are you saying that it's not for you? You have never tried. You can't really tell. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So that's also not a very good reason. And then again, some people say that meditation is something passive. You're just sitting there, enduring everything, doing nothing. Well, again, this is not the case. Meditation is not about passivity. It's not about just enduring everything. The Buddha always encouraged manly effort, manly striving, diligence, training, patience, striving, all those things. None of that is a gradual training, a gradual path. None of this is passive. There are certain things that cannot be changed, and those should be endured, like the weather or insects or things like that. The Buddha said, we can't change them. They will always be there, so we must endure them. But that is just one part of the training, a training in enduring those things that cannot be changed. And then again, there are other people who say that it is too hard. I can't sit all day. Yeah, the good news is you don't have to sit all day, and it's not too hard. You can do it at any given moment, pretty much. You can practice virtue all the time, and essentially that is what meditation is. You can be nice in life. You can not hate others. You can not rage while driving. Those are all possibilities, and those all carry over into meditation. And everyone can do that all the time. You don't have to sit. Sitting is just a nice and modern and convenient way of doing it. It feels very meditative and very monk-like, but it's by no means necessary. Lots of people were just doing walking meditation during the time of the Buddha. The gist of it is that you just should do something that is boring enough so that you can actually contemplate and think while doing it. This is why we sit, because we are not distracted all the time. And yet another group of people says that meditation is too selfish, just self-improvement. Well, it is not. As we will later see, probably in the next lecture, meditation has a positive impact on all the people around us, not just on us. It's not a selfish thing to do, I can promise you that. And then there are other people that I find very often in YouTube comments that say that everything is a desire, which is not true. The Buddha did not say that we should avoid all kind of gratification or all kind of good feelings. In fact, he did say we should avoid the addictive kind of bad feelings, those things that we crave. That is what makes us suffer. We can just walk in the park and enjoy it. We can eat food and take some joy in it, as long as we are not addicted to it. This is the important part. This is what we should avoid. We should not fall for the sensuality trap, but not everything that feels good and is agreeable is sensuality. Yet another group of people says that it is too religious, and to that I can only say and argue that the mystical elements in Buddhism are quite rare, and everything the Buddha says is absolutely rational, absolutely logical, and I hope I can convince all those people who think that way with this lecture. And then there's another group of people who is kind of jaded and says that nirvana is unattainable, which again is not true. If you set your mind to it and are willing to do the training to achieve nibbana or nirvana, however you want to call it, then it is possible. And even if you don't get there in this lifetime, every part of the way there is still immensely beneficial. It's not a binary switch. You did not profit all the time and suddenly you profit. No, you profit all the time. All the small steps towards the final goal is very rewarding and very beneficial. The Buddha called his training good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. Not suddenly the flips a switch and everything is super nice. Other people say, I don't have enough time. Again, well, you can think like that if you only think in the very narrow sense of meditation where you sit down. But while doing the dishes, you can meditate. While doing the laundry, you can meditate. You can be mindful doing those things. You can be virtuous doing those things. When there is a mind of ill will, you can say no to your mind. No, I don't want to be all hateful right now, and I don't want to be bothered by doing the dishes. Those are all possibilities. It's all mindfulness, it's all meditation. But people never think about it that way. So I would encourage you to reframe your ideas of meditation and mindfulness in that sense. During the time of the Buddha, the main method was the training in virtue and non-reactivity all the time because people were busy. They were working on the fields, creating food and all kinds of things. And that, was a very demanding job. They had no time to meditate on the cushion all the time. Yeah. And the next thing is that it promotes inactivity and passivity. And again, that is not true. It is a very active thing. And it's also not a pessimistic religion. It shows us the way out of suffering so that we are happy all the time. What is pessimistic about that? All the Buddha says is that we should not delude ourselves. Our happiness, the feeble kind of happiness, is not lasting. It will not stay there forever. All the kind of things that we try to attain will vanish at some point. And this is just fact. This is not pessimistic, it's just realistic. But the fact that he shows us a way out of this, a training that we can do in this very lifetime, so where we do not have to wait for death to occur, is a very encouraging sign for me. And I think it's a very good thing, actually. But let us now come to certain exaggerations and certain myths about meditation. And there are a lot of them. For example, that mindfulness gets you high on life, or that there is such a thing as mindful indulgence. People try to stick to their addictions and just do them mindfully, and that is not possible. You cannot be mindful and at the same time absorbed in your object of addiction. It's impossible. People who talk about mindful masturbation or mindful drug taking or trying to meditate while high, that is not possible. Meditation, at least the Buddhist kind of meditation, is very open and it requires a very clear and heedful attitude. And that is not in line with drugs of most kind. And it's certainly not in line with being addicted in sensuality. So you should also try to avoid that. And then there is a myth that meditation removes thoughts. No, it does not. You cannot really remove thoughts. One of the truths in Buddhism is the truth of non-self. And this is essentially a truth of non-control. And then there are people who say, against what the Buddha said, pretty much, that you can just remove thoughts. No, you can't. You can't control your thinking. You have no say in the arising of thoughts in your mind, as we will later see via some experiments. And thus you cannot remove them. So, sure, there are states where there are no verbal thoughts present, and those are pretty nice, but that doesn't mean that the goal is to remove all thoughts. It's not. You need thinking to understand. The first jhana, the first meditative absorption, I don't think it's a very good word, the first meditative collection, or something like that, is full of thoughts. In fact, it's a defining characteristic that the Buddha used. And then there are people who say that meditation is the one cure for everything, and I was guilty of that for quite some time. It is not. It makes you not good at, predicting the future or anything like that. It has its applications, but it's not for everyone. And yet other people say that you have never, that is all about mythical experiences that are given to you. Sure, you can have mythical experiences, and those are kind of nice. I also had some times in meditation where it feels like I was levitating or anything like that. It's very pleasant, but it's not the goal of meditation. The goal of meditation in Buddhism is understanding. And yet another myth is that you never have bad feelings again. That is also not true. It's about not being affected by the feelings that are there, which is very different from not having bad feelings ever again. But people propagate that myth all the time. There are bad feelings, but you can remain indifferent or unaffected toward them. And then there are myths that your consciousness go to another dimension, to the astral plane or whatever. Yeah, maybe it does. But again, that's not what it is about. It is about understanding. It's about insight into the non-self nature of experience. This is what sets you free from all suffering. And all those mythical experiences are sure nice, but why do you want them? If there was no craving, you wouldn't need them. You were just perfectly happy all the time and don't need any of those experiences. And then there's a series of myths that time, space, self, etc. are just illusions and do not really exist. The designations are problems. The reality behind all those things is what is truly what we strive for. Again, that is not true. Time is real. Space is real. It's just not what we think it is. Just like the self. Well, maybe you can think of it in terms of that kind of illusion, that what we think about self and time and space or whatever is not really applicable. That might carry some truth, but to say that they do not really exist, that is very false. And then there is a myth that there are no bad meditations. There are bad feeling meditations, very much, but you can learn a lot from them. So there are bad meditations if you over-meditate, under-meditate, or mis-meditate, as the Buddha explained it. Those three kinds of meditation are not very good. You can meditate with your sensuality and get nothing out of it, and that should be avoided. And then there is an entire huge school of Buddhism or awakening where they glorify the present moment and tell you to be present. Just be present, just be present. That's also not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught you to be present, but it is about what you do in the present moment, what you incline your mind towards. Yes, it is a good precondition. Being present essentially just means being mindful. And when you do, you can put your mind to good work. But you have to do that. It's not the presence that is magical. It is what you do with the presence and how you use it to understand things. And cultivating meditation works completely different than any other skill is also a huge myth. People try to have all those things handed to them and not attain them by work and understanding. It requires work and it requires understanding. It follows the same patterns. We use the same mind to understand Mars, and we still have the same mind to understand meditation and spirituality. It's not too different. And those are also some harmful views, and they should be avoided, in my opinion. And then there is another school of people who say that meditation is too simple, or for some other scientific reason they cannot follow it. And those are especially people like atheists. I'm not sure. I think Sam Harris was having a debate with Richard Dawkins, who was not very much into meditation and was completely out of question for him to ever meditate. And to be honest, I don't really understand why. And those people often ask themselves, how could simple mindfulness of breathing ever lead to liberation or whatever? In essence, humans have a complexity bias and only think that complicated things can work or that they do not need meditation. Well, maybe they don't, but when they are about to die, they will face fear of death and everything like everyone else, and will realize that their ideas about their own self just being a particle cloud and everything was essentially just a cope to avoid the fear of dying. But it will hit you nonetheless, unless you prepared yourself in the right way. And yet other people say that it is too indirect seeming or too vague to work. The Buddha always talked in such abstract terms. And that is true, but he was as specific as he could be. And you have to do something you don't understand. This is essentially a problem. And there are, simple things that can totally work, but you don't understand. And sometimes the complexity, especially the complexity of meditation, is hidden, and the true difficulty must be revealed. And for that, I have prepared some example from a German TV show called Tabaluga, where there was some tiny drake, some tiny dragon. And in that show, there was a mini game at the end that some children had to perform, where they had to find a certain way through a field of sheets of ice that were hexagonally shaped. And essentially, the entire Buddhist training can be compared to that mini game. In the beginning, you are starting on the near shore, as the Buddha called it. And then you want to cross a river. And some of those sheets of ice are very slippery or dangerous, or they break below your feet. And there's only really a very limited way to the other side. And in an optimal world, we would know the way. Then we could just follow a certain order of sheets of ice, and then we can reach the other side pretty much safely, and then we are free from all suffering. This is the idea. And the Buddhist way, the Buddhist training, essentially works like that. The Buddha kind of points us the way. But in the beginning, we don't really understand it. So we can't see that way at all. It's hidden from us. To us, so it's just a huge mass of experience pretty much. And we do not know the way out of suffering at all. We do not know what to do to escape arisen suffering. We can only cope. We can only cope with eating chocolate and all those kinds. And it is even worse. In the TV show, there was an evil snowman called Arctos or something like that. And he was creating all kinds of hindrances for the competitors. And in the meditation simile, he creates all the sensuality for us and tries to taunt us with it. And in Buddhism, you can compare this evil snowman with Mara, the evil one. This is how the Buddha called it, Mara the tempter. And he throws all the sensuality at us. He tries to bait us with instant gratification, with music, with cakes, with drugs, with alcohol, and he tries to hide all the diseases and the old age and the catastrophes from us, and the death, so that we do not think about it and run into it unprepared. Which is a nice metaphor, to be honest, which is easily understandable by people who are not very much into philosophy or such things. So this is how meditation can be understood. But in reality, it is not like that. It's not such a tiny field of ice sheets. It's much, much worse. It is a huge field, and you have to do the right things for a very, very long time without seeing any results to actually make it to the far shore, which was a designation for Nibbana, for right view in the Buddhist teachings. And it's even worse than that. We cannot even see the playing field. We can't see any of this. We don't even know that we are playing such a game. And thus, We are falling for all the unsafe sheets of ice. And even worse, we can only see all the distractions around us. So not only can't we see the real game we are playing, we are also distracted all the time and can only really see the instant gratification that Mara, the evil one, the tempter, tries to make us see. And this is a very not nice state to be in. Most of the time we first have to encounter death, old age, sickness, or any of the other items that are thrown out there before we actually try to seek out a way. And as the playing field is so big, it's nearly impossible to reach the other side without the help of another individual, which is why the Buddha called utterance of another, or teaching of another, or the Buddhist training, as a necessary precondition to actually reach the other side, the safety from bondage, the safety from suffering. So this is what meditation is really like. You are trying to follow an invisible path, and you have to do it for a long enough time to reach the other shore, and have to go by faith, by a certain degree of faith, until it becomes confirmed faith. Once you understood that you have made it to the other side, you can in hindsight reflect about it, but you can only do it afterwards. So meditation is actually quite difficult, or understanding the Buddhist training is quite difficult, and the Buddha even went as far as calling it the most difficult thing out there. It is easier to conquer 1,000 armies than to conquer the self. Those were pretty much his words. But anyway, this should be enough for today, I think. If you have any questions about the content of this presentation, feel free to post them down below, and I will collect them and answer them in a questions and answer video at the end. And the next time we will continue with the rest of this presentation, and then we will go into the actual stuff that is very much in line with what the Buddha actually taught, and try to understand that in depth, in chronological order. But enough for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you find what I do here beneficial, consider recommending the videos or the lecture to another person. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day, and goodbye, and maybe until next time.